So I'm curious, show of hands, who's here as a procrastination technique? Who's here because all those other things on their desk or in their computers or brain are just too much to think about? This seems like a way easier thing to do.
Well, I'm seeing a couple of hands, or more than a couple going up.
Ah!
Busted.
Okay, well, hopefully by the end of this, you'll just be ready to race back to your desk and get going. And on that note, I would like to kick us off by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the different lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. For Tina and I, we're here in Brisbane, Meanjin, and for us, that is the Yagara and the Turrbal people. We would like to invite all of the diversity that exists in this group that are here with us today into the conversation, because these places have always been places of growth and learning, and we continue that today as we embark on this interesting journey, hopefully interesting journey, into what procrastination is, looks like, and how we can support ourselves to move beyond that.
Thank you, Tash. So I was actually reading an article the other day that said we procrastinate up to 2.5 hours a day. And I couldn't believe it. Who else here thinks that's mind-blowing, especially in this world where we say that we don't have a lot of time? And so now, if you're anything like me, you've probably got a to-do list that's as long as your arm, and there's probably one or two or maybe more than half of it, of tasks on there you've been putting off for who knows how long. Maybe you've caught yourself saying, oh, start right after I do that procrastination webinar, or maybe I'll just check my emails, or see if anything fun is on Instagram right now. Does it sound familiar? Now, I am seeing a few smiles and nods there, so I know we've all been there. And today we're not here to beat ourselves up about it, but instead we want to explore why procrastination has such a strong grip on us, how it sneaks into our lives, and most importantly, how we can outsmart it. So big warm welcome from us at Performance Frontiers to our webinar, Stop the Dilly Dally Procrastination. This is session number 2 of our four-part series on taboo topics, and we'll speak more to that at the end of this webinar today. Before we jump into the content, as you might have heard coming into the room, we are recording the session. Would also invite you all to just turn your screens on. This really helps us connect with you all as facilitators and just get a gauge of how the group is traveling as we navigate the webinar. And if we could please keep ourselves on mute, would really appreciate it. As you can see, there's quite a lot of us on here today. So for those of you that don't know me and we haven't met before, I'm Tina Biro. I'm a facilitator and executive coach here at Performance Frontiers. If any of my previous examples resonated with you, you're not alone. I'm not immune to procrastination myself, even though I know the no's. And I like to call myself out here and share my favorite way to procrastinate. And this is what I like to call productive procrastination. So when I'm putting off something, I like to fool myself into thinking I'm not procrastinating by doing something else that needs to be done, which my favorite thing is cleaning the kitchen. So whenever my kitchen is sparkling, you know that I've been putting off something that is more important, that's been on my to-do list, but I was like, oh, it feels like a really good idea to just clean the kitchen and, you know, clean out the dishwasher. And so that might not resonate with you, and that's okay, because it's also important to remember that we can all procrastinate differently. We're all wired differently, and that's perfectly fine. Our minds work in different ways, and, you know, part of the strategies is to find out what works best for each of us and acknowledging that. So, and that's exactly why we're here today. Now, I'm lucky to be joined by my awesome colleague and co-facilitator, Natasha Budd, and I'm curious, what's your favorite way to procrastinate?
I'm a little like you, to be honest, Tina. I'm a bit into the cleaning. I can also convince myself, little trick I do, into thinking that unless everything is clean, I'm not going to be able to concentrate anyway. I just won't be able to do the task unless everything's clean, particularly my desk, maybe even my drawers, maybe even the cupboard beside me, all needs to be tidy before I can even think about doing that task. I'm also pretty good at making endless cups of tea. So I'm curious at this point in time, I saw Ali, you smile about the cups of tea. Are you also a cups of tea person? Yes, okay. So I invite you now to open the chat box up. We're going to show you a meme. And this is of our friend, the procrastinator. He's got 2 red buttons there. You can choose the left, do something productive, or the right, watch TikTok for 5 hours. That's his particular procrastination technique. What is yours? Can I invite you to write into the chat box? What's your particular go-to procrastination technique? Thank you, Amanda. Sparkling kitchen, great.
Make a to-do list, rewrite my list, make a coffee, cleaning. There's some themes emerging. Water the plants. I do that one too.
TikTok, okay. Some like our superheroes, someone's getting into TikTok. All right, continue writing those. I love seeing them scrolling through, but I'm going to give you a second task. So this time what I'd like you to do is to grab a Post-it note or a piece of paper, something immediately available to you there. And I want you to write on that piece of paper one thing that you have been procrastinating over. So what is it that you should have done last week or the week before, or maybe a month ago, that you are still holding on to? Might be bothering you a little bit, but you are not dealing with it. I want you to write that down and just hold it there. We're going to deal with that a little bit later in the session.
So to better understand why we procrastinate, we want to dive into understanding the deeper mechanisms behind it. Now, true procrastination isn't just about avoiding tasks. It's actually a complex failure to self-regulate. So for today's webinar, the definition we'll be working with is this, which is the voluntary delay of some important task that we intend to do despite knowing that we'll suffer as a result. And so we know that a poor sense of time can worsen procrastination, but the real issue lies in our inability to manage our emotions. And when we think about procrastination, at its core is the force that stops us from doing what we've set out to accomplish is driven by an urge to avoid uncomfortable or negative feelings. So we really want to differentiate that procrastination is not poor time management skills. It's not intended reflection time. It's not strategic planning or lack of prioritization. So an example is here, if I have a dozen things to do, obviously 10, 11, and 12 have to wait. The real procrastinator has those 12 things, maybe does 1 or 2 of them, then rewrites the list, shuffles it around, makes an extra copy of it, maybe goes to the kitchen, cleans it a little bit, makes a cup of coffee. That's procrastinating, and that's different. And so we really want to tap into this idea of the negative emotions. What is stirred up for us when we're most likely to procrastinate? Is it fear? Is it insecurity? Is it a sense of incompetence? Because it's those feelings that can make us, even the simplest tasks, feel really overwhelming. And so this is what actually prompts us to delay those tasks. And so you can see a variety of different emotions there. We've got fear, insecurity, maybe overwhelm, anxiety, that can all push this sense to delay a task in the moment.
So now I'm getting curious about how you're experiencing that task that you wrote down a moment ago. So are any of these emotions associated with that task for you? So on your piece of paper, I now want you to just take a moment to think, what is it that you feel when you start to think about having to do that task? Just a moment there to jot some things down.
I know for me, Tash, it's usually a sense of anxiety where I start to worry about the results that shows up, and that's when I have a tendency to procrastinate.
Yeah, I can sometimes get like really irritated at it and annoyed at it. And I'm just like, oh, so I feel like it's a human or something that's doing me wrong. But then I want you to think about what are some of the thoughts that are driving those emotions? What are you telling yourself? So it might be that you can't do this, that you don't have time, that you need help, that there's more research needed before you can even begin this. And these I want you to write down into the chat box again. So what is that little voice in your head saying to you when you go to think about doing this task? What are your voices saying?
It's going to take too long. Yes, Emily,
You
I
have
can
time for
relate.
this. Yeah.
This will be so complicated.
Yeah. And sometimes things are big and complicated. Yeah. Surely there's other things I should be doing. Yeah. Yep. Okay.
I'd rather do something with immediate gratification. Love it, Brent. We'll come back to that actually.
Okay, so these doubts and fears and little voices in our heads that are battling with us, they actually have a real impact on our bodies. So in 2023, there was a Swedish survey done on university students that looked at procrastination. And what they found is that those people who are experiencing high levels of procrastination were also experiencing heightened levels of depression and stress, anxiety, physical pain, poor sleep, physical inactivity, loneliness. I mean, some awful things going on here. So there is, in fact, a real cost to us and to our bodies in engaging in this kind of practice. And it's not procrastination itself that's causing this pain. It's that emotional turmoil, those emotions that we were speaking to before around the procrastination. So if you've experienced these, you are absolutely not alone. Procrastination affects most people at some point in their lives, and it's in fact heightened at particular times in our lives and also potentially for particular people. So it's probably worth thinking for a moment here about neurodiversity and what role that plays in this space. So we all experience procrastination differently, and that's okay. Our brains are wired uniquely, our experiences are unique, and it's going to show up in really different ways for all of us. So for example, if you're someone who has ADHD, then you might be more likely to seek alternate stimulation when tasks become a little bit boring or a little bit mundane. For individuals on the autism spectrum, you might struggle with shifting between activities, or if you experience dyslexia, you might approach tasks with a little bit of caution because you know it's going to take you just that little bit longer than your neurotypical peers. So some of this can be really heightened and exacerbate this procrastination problem that people are facing. So if that's you or someone on your team, it's going to be particularly important to find some strategies. And as we said, different things work for different people. So stay tuned. We are going to get through some strategies today. And as we do that, it's really important that we think about practicing self-compassion, because it is going to bring up these feelings that are really difficult to face.
Absolutely, Tash. So before we jump into the strategies, because I know that's important to a lot of us, a question I'm holding is what's actually going on in the brain that causes us to avoid the things we know we should be doing. So I've already introduced Tash, and now I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce to you two more friends that I'm going to bring along on this journey with us to help explain or to speak to this question. So my two friends that will be joining now called the gratification gremlin and the goal guardian. And so these two characters can really help us understand what's going on in our brains. Now, think about procrastination as a battle between these two characters. The goal guardian represents our future self. This is the prefrontal cortex of our brain, and this is the parts that are responsible for planning and decision-making, that long-term thinking. Then we've also got our gratification gremlin. This little friend is driven by our limbic system. That's a fancy way of saying it's responsible for our emotions, our survival, and really importantly, immediate rewards. And so it prioritizes short-term pleasure and avoiding discomfort. And this becomes really important in the context of procrastination. If we look at the evolution of human beings and we think back to our ancestors, they predominantly lived in what we refer to as an immediate return environment. What I mean by that is this is where our actions had really quick and direct results. So, for example, if you think back to like hunting for food, finding shelter, our survival really depended on us having a quick reward system and responding to the immediate returns of what was happening in front of us. And this is where the gratification gremlin played a really crucial role. It was driving quick, impulsive decisions. And again, our survival depended on it. It was necessary. But over the last 500 years, our society has shifted significantly, and it's shifted in a way that we refer to now as a delayed return environment. So in our current modern world, many of our actions, for example, like saving for our retirement or trying to stay fit and healthy or learning a new skill or, planning that presentation for work, it actually requires long-term effort and patience with rewards that are often delayed by time. And therein lies the challenge. So while society has evolved really rapidly, the human brain hasn't actually caught up. And so this gratification gremlin that we all have inside of us is still wired to seek immediate rewards. And it really struggles in this new modern world. And so this mismatch between our brain's wiring and the way we live in society today, it creates a constant battle between the gratification gremlin and the goal guardian. Now, imagine you've been tasked with creating a presentation for some new initiative at work. You're really excited. You want to take on the challenge. You're like, yes, your goal guardian kicks in right away, knows the best way to approach this. It makes this amazing plan, breaks it into smaller tasks. Yep, we're going to work on it consistently. We're going to have, spare time at the end. Now, wouldn't that be great? If, it would be really ideal if this is how it always panned out. But we know that as the days pass, the gratification gremlin starts to creep in and it whispers, oh, hey, there's still plenty of time. You deserve a break right now. Just one more Netflix episode, then we'll get to work. It won't hurt. And so what ends up happening over time is this, all that focused planning we put into actually getting the task done ends up being taken up by all the different ways we procrastinate. And so
sorry, I'm curious here, Tina, looking at this graph. You're saying that we act when we get to that end part there, but why is that? Because what I'm assuming is that as we get to that end part, as that deadline looms, those emotions are actually getting stronger. So if those emotions are inhibiting us in the first place, why are they not inhibiting us right at the end there? Well, surely they're worse, right?
Yeah, good question. I actually grappled with this myself as I was diving into the research. And the reason is, as the task moves closer, our brain starts to perceive it as an immediate threat. So again, think back to that immediate response environment and the delayed response environment. Our gratification gremlin responds to things in our immediate environment. So as the deadline approaches and the proximity moves into our immediate environment, we're forced into action. We can no longer ignore it. This would be paralleled, like if we think back again to our ancestors, the lion's no longer off in the distance where we can ignore it. Like we know it's out there. This time the lion's right in front of us and it's like, hello, deadline approaching. And so irrespective of, how uncomfortable we feel in that moment, we're actually forced to respond to it now. And it comes at a cost. And this is why we want to alleviate procrastination, because this cost usually leads to what you're alluding to, Tash, that increased stress, reduced focus in the moment, and typically lower quality work and output. And so what we want to do is break this tug of war between the goal guardian and the gratification gremlin and get them working in a better partnership.
So building a partnership, how do we do that? That seems like a really difficult task, because we've got to keep our eyes on that long-term goal while at the same time taking action, right? That's the relationship bit. So I guess the thing then is that we need to make it as easy as possible for our gratification gremlin to get started on the task. And we then have to bring a little bit of trust to the situation and think that that will bring us the motivation that we need to keep going. So we know that the things we're procrastinating on are really difficult emotions. They bring up these really difficult emotions. And, you know, to be honest, we just don't want to face those. I want to get going on a project, but that little voice in my head is saying, maybe you can't actually even do this. Maybe you don't have the skills. Maybe you need more research time. Or if it's about going to the gym, I might be thinking, you know, I'm going to be so embarrassed. I haven't run in years. And what if I can't work the equipment? Like, how embarrassing is that going to be? So these feelings of fear and shame and hurt, they tend to be really demotivating, and they kill that kind of inspiration that we're looking for that will enable us to take the action and get going. And so we try to avoid them, as we've said, by cleaning out the fridge, checking out email, because that feels good, right? Gratification gremlin just got a little kick. Anything that we can do that's going to take our minds off those really uncomfortable feelings. So we end up in this kind of catch-22. The more that we think about the task, the more those negative feelings are going to arise for us. And then the greater the urge is going to be for us to go and grab that cup of tea or refile our filing system. So the task then for us is to get that motivation back and to start thinking constructively. So I'm going to ask you to think about the Nike motto, the just do it. I don't know about you, but that motto has always kind of irritated me. It feels like a simplistic answer to a very complex question. There are so many reasons why we can't do it, right? Maybe I'm not motivated to do that now. It's not the right time. I'm just not feeling it. I have no inspiration. And there is this common belief that there's a kind of linear line between inspiration, motivation, and action. I'm going to wait for that inspiration. That's going to motivate me to take action. And then that action is going to be really automatic and easy. But motivation often comes after we start something, not before. So James Clear, who has researched in this area, talks about not being able to rely on those fleeting emotions of motivation or inspiration, but instead relying on our ability to think and to take action in a thoughtful cognitive kind of process. So what if like Nike suggests, we just decide to take the action first. We do the action despite our lack of inspiration or motivation. And what this might look like is that if I'm wanting to get fitter and I'm wanting to start running, I'm going to just put out my clothes. I'm going to set my alarm. And when that alarm goes off, I am not going to think about it. I am not going to get into an argument with myself about it. I am just going to do it. I'm just going to get up and I'm going to start running. So what we thought was a linear process then begins to become a cyclic process. So we take the action, and then when we take that action, for me running, I'm in Brisbane, we have a beautiful river. I can run along that river. I can watch the sunrise. It is truly inspiring. And then I'm proud of myself after I've done that. I can honestly say I have never run and thought, oh, I wish I had stayed in bed. I have always been glad that I got up and that I did that run. But just doing it is actually tough, right? So we need to find those strategies that are going to enable us to get up and do the run, like the putting the clothes out, like the setting the alarm. But we actually have a lot more for you.
Absolutely. And this is a process, the 3Rs process, that can help us navigate this and mitigate procrastination. So what it does is when we're not in, like Tash was speaking to, feeling that inspired space or that motivated space, and we just need to step into taking action, this is where this process will help guide us through recognizing our own patterns, managing our emotions, and then taking intentional steps towards progress. So the first step, and this is what we have been doing throughout the webinar, is identifying when the gratification gremlin is in control. This is really about noticing when are we procrastinating, and then understanding what are the emotions driving it. So we want to acknowledge the task that we're avoiding, so that task you wrote on your post-it note, and then also what are the associated negative feelings towards that task? Is it fear? Is it doubt? Is it overwhelm? What is the emotion that's influencing your actions? And we just, in this space, want to bring awareness to it. So a question we can hold here is, what task am I avoiding right now? What are the emotions that are coming up for me? How is the gratification gremlin driving my behavior? And so once we've done this, we can then move into the regulate step of the process. This is where we want to take control and start to calm our emotions. And what that's going to enable is a mindset shift. So this is where I spoke to that partnership between the gratification gremlin and the goal guardian. We want them to be friends. We don't want them to be fighting. And so rather than letting our gremlin avoid discomfort, we start to manage our emotions by shifting our mindset, by acknowledging what's showing up for us. And then from there, we're able to step into the redirect phase. And this is where we take intentional action. So there might still be some hangover. We might still be feeling a little bit of negative emotions, and that's okay. This phase is really about making a conscious choice to shift out of avoidance and into action. This is where we want to allow our goal guardian to guide us towards progress. So even one small step can help us start to create momentum. And throughout the first phase of this webinar, we have really covered that recognize phase, tapping into those emotions, understanding what's showing up for us. So now we're going to jump into the regulate phase. And when procrastinating, it's really easy for us to fall into the trap of harsh self-criticism. Now, who's been there? Who's got that inner harsh critic? Few hands going up, nods, yes. So again, we've all been there. And what this does, it actually deepens the cycle of avoidance. So if we think about it, we've already got some negative emotions surfacing that we're wanting to avoid. Then we're being really mean to ourselves and beating ourselves up. And that further makes us feel bad. So we're going to avoid even more. Instead, what we would invite you all to do here is to practice self-compassion, to really help shift our mindset and reduce the impact of those negative emotions that are driving procrastination. So a really helpful way to start here is ask ourselves a question that, if a friend was in this situation, how would we support them? What is it that we would say to them? And so this allows us to approach the situation with kindness rather than judgment, with understanding rather than criticism. And some other questions we could ask is, what can I do to make this feel more manageable or maybe less overwhelming, again, to alleviate some of that anxiety that can be present? Or maybe we can ask, how can I support myself through this without judgment? What if I was just to suspend my judgment for a moment? What would that look and feel like? How does that shift for me internally? And something else that's really helpful here is some affirmations. So we can start by practicing, and feel free to take these and put them into your own words, whatever works for you. But the idea is that it's going to be accessible. What if in the moment when we're struggling with procrastination, we said to ourselves, hey, it's okay to feel challenged by this task. I'm not alone in this experience. As we can see, there's more than one of us on this webinar. So this is something that is far-reaching, and a lot of us will struggle with it at some point, and that's okay. Maybe saying to yourself, hey, I'm capable of moving forward, even if it's just one small step. I don't need to figure out the next 10 steps. What does the next one step look like? Or maybe it's just acknowledging that, hey, this is a moment of struggle. It doesn't need to define me.
I'm curious about something here as you talk about these affirmations and self-care. What is the difference? Because sometimes I find it difficult to distinguish between self-compassion and procrastination, because I might find myself in the morning when that alarm goes off going, oh, it's a little bit drizzly out and I had a big night last night, and, maybe I'm just going to show myself a little bit of self-compassion and I'm going to sleep in this morning. I'm not going to go for that run. So is that self-compassion or is that procrastination? I genuinely don't know sometimes.
What a curly question. Was anyone else kind of wondering that? When is it? How do we get really discerning of what is self-compassion and what is actually procrastination dressed up as self-compassion? What our little gratification gremlin has put on a bit of a costume and is parading around as self-compassion. And so this is where our awareness becomes really key. And we all know ourselves better than anyone else. And we want to tap into some self-honesty. And what's going to help us is our goal guardian. So say, for example, in what you shared, Tash, you choose to sleep in. You decide to listen to that voice and you choose to sleep in. You'll know once you get out of bed, that goal guardian will say, oh, we didn't make the right choice here. You start to feel guilty. I should have gone for that run. I should have got up. I can't believe I fell for it again. So then you know it was your gratification gremlin getting into your ear, telling you to sleep in. If, however, your goal guardian says, actually, it's been a really exhausting week. We've had a lot on. I've had a lot of late nights and I really needed that sleep in. I feel much better now, and tomorrow I can jump into it. And it's really important for us to tap into that feedback loop and see how we feel after the fact, because that's usually a really good indicator whether it was the gratification gremlin or it was our self-compassion.
And I imagine that tuning in can also be difficult because some of us are more critical than others. So I might be more inclined to say, no, you should have got up, or give myself a bit of a free ticket that morning. Is that right?
Yeah, so some of us might have a harsher inner critic or whatnot. Again, it can show up for us in different ways. And I think for me, the important thing is that this isn't black and white. We've spoken to the fact that it's a lot more complex than that. And what we want to do is start to build evidence over time. So through that building of evidence, you'll notice a pattern emerge. And that's what we want to pay attention to. What's the theme here? And again, most of us will have a degree of self-awareness, hopefully, where like I know I'm a really harsh critic of myself, or I know that actually I'm strengthening my self-compassion muscle. And so over time, we start to build that evidence base that will help us be more discerning.
Right. So to build that evidence base, I have to take action first, right? Okay, so how do we do that? We're going to share with you a couple of strategies this morning, a couple that work really well for Tina and I, and they sit in this redirect space. So taking intentional action by just starting that task, just doing it, putting our goal guardian in the driver's seat and moving toward progress. But this can be tough. We acknowledge that. And so it's about finding the right strategy for you. We're going to share lots today, and we're going to invite you to think, will that work for me or will that not work for me? What's the one that's I'm going to grab hold of and start to work with? So two powerful ones that we have found are the concentration clock and blast off. You may or may not have come across these before. The way that the concentration clock works is that you just begin by picking a task. So you choose the task that you want to work on, and then you set your alarm. You decide on an amount of time. It might be 10 minutes, it might be 25 minutes, it might be something else. And you go, for this amount of time, I am just going to work hard at this task that I have set myself. And the second part is, when you start that timer, you just focus on what it is that you need to do, and you continue that until that alarm goes off. And then the good news is, when the alarm goes off, you get a little treat. You get to take a short break, and then you start the cycle again. So what this concentration clock actually does is a number of things, actually. It reduces overwhelm, because what we're doing is we're chunking things down into much smaller portions. So it's reducing that overwhelm that we feel of the massiveness of that task. And some of you wrote that in the chat box earlier, that the task might just seem completely overwhelming. So this can support that. It enhances our focus. So the short time session boosts our concentration, and it minimizes our distractions. It focuses us down on just that one small thing that we've got to do. It also prevents burnout because we're taking those regular breaks. We're not taking ourselves to a point of irritation or exhaustion. And we're seeing this emerge more and more in the corporates that we work with, and it's also showing up in education, where instead of setting a 30-minute meeting, we're setting a 20-minute meeting. We're giving people that extra 10 minutes. Instead of an hour-long meeting, we're setting a 50-minute meeting. So everyone has just that little bit of time to take a breath, reorientate before they move into the next thing that it is they have to do. So that's really important, even if it's only 5 minutes. The fourth thing is it creates a sense of urgency. So when you've got that ticking timer on, you've got that little bit of urgency going on a fairly low critical task, we're only talking 10 or 25 minutes, then we can get an urgency that's going to boost our inclination to get that task finished. And when we start to do this repeatedly, then we start to build a consistency. We start to build a kind of productive habit. And we all know how much our bodies love habit. Once we can build one, it's going to ask us to repeat that without us even thinking too much about it at all.
Okay. So we've covered the concentration clock, and Tash mentioned the other strategy called blast off that we want to speak to as well. And it can be really helpful in this third step of the process, the redirect phase. And blast off is just another powerful strategy that can help us push past procrastination and get into action. I learned this technique from Mel Robbins, if anyone here is familiar with her work or has heard of her before. So in terms of this technique, this speaks to that moment when we're hesitating. So we're thinking about delaying a task, and this is when our brain tries to default to distractions. We're wanting to avoid that discomfort of starting. And with this technique, we can start to interrupt that pattern simply by counting down. So go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom, blast off, just like a rocket. And the idea is that we take action. Now, the main example of this that comes to mind for me isn't in a work context, but it was when I went bungee jumping and I was standing on the end of that platform and my gratification gremlin was like, don't do it. It was very fearful. It was trying to talk me out of it. And I knew that if I didn't do this countdown, if I didn't listen to that and go on the one, I was never going to, because what ends up happening is that you get the gratification gremlin and the goal guardian start to get into an argument. And once they're in that argument, usually the gratification gremlin's going to win. And so what we want to do is through that countdown, what we actually do is we engage that prefrontal cortex, we engage our goal guardian. And instead of sitting there stuck in hesitation, we take control and we start moving forward. And so whether for you that when we reach one, that action is opening a document, making a phone call, or just starting the task, the idea is that it's simple, it's fast, and it works before your brain has time to talk you out of it, before that little gratification gremlin comes into your ear and starts whispering.
And yes, that gratification gremlin is often in my ear. So what do? There are two tasks that we've given you, or two strategies that we've given you, but there are loads more. So we're going to go through a quick rapid fire of what some of those are. And what I invite you to do now is to just listen. And if something triggers for you a connection, so you're thinking, oh, that might work for me. Oh, I can see myself doing that. Or that has worked for me in the past, I want you to throw it down into the chat box. So let's go, rapid fire examples. I'm going to start with chunking. So chunking is where you take a big complex task and you chunk it down into more manageable pieces. So instead of thinking, this project is overwhelming, I'm just going to start with, what's the introduction I'm going to write? Let me start with that. And I'm going to give myself an amount of time to do that.
Minimizing distractions. This is where we identify and eliminate common distractions to help us stay focused. My favorite one is putting my phone in another room if I'm trying to do really focused activity. And even if I'm practicing the concentration clock, I'll still hear the alarm in the other room, but I'm not tempted to check my phone as I'm trying to do focused work.
Fantastic. Reward yourself. I love this one because I'm not someone who would normally reward myself. But if I can have that cup of tea after I've done my 30 minutes instead of before, then I've rewarded myself in a way that's really gratifying.
Love it. Time blocking is another one where we allocate specific blocks of time to tasks that help us create structure, and then it minimizes procrastination. So I did this yesterday where I blocked out a chunk of time to focus on this webinar, and I gave myself permission to not answer any calls or emails, and I just focused on what I had to do.
Awesome. And if that is still difficult for you, then maybe you can try getting an accountability partner. So that's someone who you deliberately ask to support you on whatever it is that you need to do. So I, in fact, did this with a colleague this morning, and my alarm is set for 3 o'clock when I am going to call her and say, how are you going with that task? I'm here to help.
Love it. The 2-minute rule. So if something takes less than 2 minutes to do, we want to do it immediately to build that momentum. So for example, if you've read an email and it's actually going to be a really quick response, you do it in that moment rather than coming back to it later on.
And eat the frog. I find this one really difficult, to be honest. I did see in the chat box, this is someone's favorite, so good on you. But starting the hardest task first is the eat the frog. So if you can get that difficult thing out of the way before everything else, then you're going to be in reward right from the get-go.
Love it. And the last one, changing our environment. And I've seen that come up in the chat as well. That can really give us a fresh perspective, reduce our procrastination triggers. So I know for myself, if I've been in my office all day, sometimes just even moving out to my lounge room or to my dining area, it really helps shake things up and minimizes my procrastination. And some of you may have seen it who've been on coaching calls with me, or I've interacted. You'll see my background periodically changing, and that's me just shaking up my environment.
Okay, so that's a lot of strategies. They are all for us as individuals. So we have looked now at a range of strategies that we can employ as individuals. But what about for our teams? I imagine a lot of you are leaders of teams. And what if we observe that they're procrastinating? What can we as leaders do to support them? Because procrastination isn't just an individual challenge. It impacts team dynamics, and it will also impact the productivity of your team. So you as a leader can do a number of things. So let's have a look at the 5 that we have chosen today. Invite four that we have chosen, apologies. Invite self-advocacy, provide structure, foster a sense of autonomy, and create a psychologically safe environment. So the first one, invite self-advocacy. So earlier we spoke a little bit about neurodiversity. How many of you would say that you fully understand the neurodiversity that exists in your teams? Hands up if you think you got a handle on that. Maybe? How many of you are maybe not sure? Maybe you know a little, but not a lot. Yep. Okay. So that's pretty normal. That's pretty normal. But the interesting thing here is that people who experience neurodiversity are aware of their situation, and they can share their needs with you if you just open the space up to allow them to do that. So your task as a leader then is to encourage them to self-advocate. Get curious, allow them to educate you, and build your own awareness around what the particular needs of your team are. So ask them what they need to get the job done. And this might be things like visual aids, particular reminders, working flexible hours, extended time on tasks, anything that is going to support them. And then they're going to feel, phew, their emotions are going to settle, and they're going to be way more capable of being able to do the tasks that they have been set. The second thing we can do is to start to provide some structure. So a lot of workplaces have high levels of freedom and low levels of structure, and these kinds of places put a lot of demand on people to self-manage, which can throw some people into threat. One of our deepest social needs is to have clarity. And if you don't have clarity, it can be a very overwhelming experience. So are your team clear on what it is that they need to do? You can't assume people know or demand that they should know. Instead, what you need to do is put some processes in place. So it might be training and development programs, it might be project management tools, or you might need to make the lines of communication clearer, regular check-ins to find out what's needed here, and feedback loops, mentoring. These are the kinds of things that are going to enable you to understand what kinds of structures your team are needing at this moment in time, rather. And it's also going to keep your team in rewards. So I'm not actually advocating micromanagement here. It's more about putting the structures in place that support people to learn the ropes and reduce their stress, and thus reduce the procrastination. So with this structure in place, the idea is that there's actually more autonomy rather than less. So the third piece then is fostering a sense of autonomy. So if we're clear on the structures of the workplace, then we've got this kind of freedom within the framework. We know what it is, that the space that we can play within. So giving employees control over their work reduces procrastination and increases their engagement and motivation. So the way that we might do that is to give them some flexibility. Sure, those constraints are in place, but they're there to hold you safe, and you've got lots of flexibility within that. You can trust them to manage the work, to make the decisions within the scope of their capacity, and then offer guidance just when it's needed, but certainly allow some space for them to make their own decisions. And finally, and perhaps this one should have gone first, is this idea that we need to create psychological safety, because no one is going to self-advocate, no one is going to come up with innovative ideas or be creative if they don't feel psychologically safe to do so. So individuals who feel comfortable in these taking risks, voicing concerns, seeking help without fear of retribution, that is when you know you're building a psychologically safe environment. And as leaders, you can reduce fear of failure or a potential humiliation, a feeling that people might become humiliated by implementing some of these strategies.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tash. Hopefully that one of those four has given you some food for thought and some action for implementation around how can you support your teams if you do find that maybe procrastination is showing up for them as well, and whilst you're also supporting yourself. And so this brings us to the last leg of our webinar today. Gosh, it's gone super quick for me. I don't know if it has for everyone else, but I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on what we've covered. And so we started off by exploring the root cause of procrastination and understanding that it's actually an emotional regulation issue that is really the challenge for us. And then this battle emerges between our gratification gremlin and our goal guardian. And so even with this understanding that our brains are wired for short-term comfort, but capable of building long-term planning, can help us take a step forward to mitigating our procrastination tendencies. We then looked at the triangle that Tash went through inspiration, motivation, and action, and then really wanted to focus in on the action part of that. How do we actually step into that phase in the absence of inspiration or motivation? So we introduced the process of recognizing when this is showing up, regulating those emotions that are influencing us to avoid, and then redirecting with a couple of strategies that we covered. And so something that I want to come back to is that piece around self-compassion, because it's really, really important in order for us to be able to take those steps towards action and overcome those moments of hesitation. And we covered then the concentration clock, blast off, which is probably my second favorite, and looked at some additional tools that can set us up for success, like chunking, minimizing distractions, and love how everybody shared in the chat which of those that actually works for them. And so now that we've covered all this, the next step that we want to do is really take what we've learned and start to apply these techniques if we're not already, or maybe start to apply them more consistently. For most of us, usually it's not a lack of knowing, but a lack of implementing. And so what's going to help bridge that gap for us? And again, remembering that with self-compassion, progress is the key, not perfection. And that's what we want to tap into. Any progress in the right direction is going to be fantastic, because we're never going to reach that idea of perfection that exists only in our imagination.
Thanks, Tina. Okay, so let's finish off our post-it note activity. Let's have a look at some of those beautiful things that we've been thinking about. I'm actually taking something here from Raylene, which is putting the music on and drowning out the noise. I'm going to try that one. And I invite you to think about, what one are you going to try? So having a look at that procrastination task that we wrote down earlier, and all of the strategies that you've named that you think you might try, which one is going to work for that particular challenge that you have? You don't need to share it in the chat box, but I want you to write it down on that piece of paper next to the task, so you know what to do next. And as you are writing that, we are going to share a QR code. This QR code will take you to a feedback form. And I plead maybe that you go in and you do this survey, because what it is for is to enable us to go, how did we go? What did you enjoy? What can we do more of? Because as Tina mentioned, we are going to do more of these sessions. So what is it that we are doing well, and what do we perhaps need to improve on? What is it that we can use moving forward? That would be really helpful. And to sweeten the deal, if you do answer the feedback, give us a little bit of feedback, then you go into the draw for 3 coaching sessions with a Performance Frontiers executive coach. So hopefully that satisfies your gratification gremlin. Or maybe it's the long term. Maybe you have to think long term about the potential of winning that. Either way, get on, fill it out for us. We would really, really appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you, Tash. And if you want to reach out to us directly, our details are there on the screen now. So feel free to add us on LinkedIn. If you have any lingering questions, any curiosities, would love to hear from you. So send us an email. Once you filled out the feedback survey, we're really plugging it, aren't we?
Well, I'm going to plug it a little more, Tina, and say, along with the QR code, if that's not working for you, the form is actually in the chat box as well.
And we've got our next 2 webinars coming up as well. So you can see them there on the screen. Fight the Fawn, People Pleasing, which is coming up in October. And then our last one, The Flawless Seeker, Perfectionism and the Inner Critic. And so hope to see you all there. Big thank you from all of us at Performance Frontiers for taking the time to join us today. I genuinely hope that there was something of value you can take away and implement as a result of being here today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Oh, look at all those waves.